The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest navigable point, 21 miles between Oman's Musandam Peninsula to the south and the Iranian coastline to the north, through which approximately 17 million barrels of crude oil move every day in the hulls of supertankers that have no alternative passage between the Persian Gulf and the global markets that depend on their cargo. It is the single most important maritime choke point in the world by the measure that matters most, the volume of strategically irreplaceable cargo that passes through no other corridor. Close the Strait of Hormuz, and the oil stops. If the oil stops long enough, economies stop, which is precisely why every power with interests in the global energy system has spent the past 5 decades ensuring the strait stays open, and precisely why Iran has spent the same period studying how to leverage the threat of closing it. But on this particular Sunday morning, the Strait of Hormuz was not the site of a blockade or a standoff in the conventional sense. It was the site of a mayday. The call came at 3:47 local time on Channel 16, a commercial tanker, Panamanian flagged, carrying crude from Basra to Rotterdam, reporting a catastrophic engine room fire that had spread to the accommodation block and was no longer controllable. The vessel was in the separation scheme, the traffic lane system that organizes commercial shipping through the strait's 2 navigable corridors, at a position approximately 11 miles south of the Iranian coast and 10 miles northwest of the Omani coastline. She was 243 meters of loaded supertanker with a crew of 22. Her captain's voice on Channel 16 was controlled, professional, and carrying a specific kind of weight. The weight of a man who has done everything he can and is now accepting that he needs help he cannot provide himself. The fire was in the accommodation block. The fire was consuming the bridge. The crew was abandoning ship. 22 sailors in the Strait of Hormuz at 3:47 on a Sunday morning. Water temperature 18 degrees Celsius. Current running northwest at approximately 1.5 knots. The nearest civilian search and rescue asset more than 90 minutes away at their best speed. The United States Navy was closer. An Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer was conducting a transit patrol in the eastern approaches to the strait, a routine positioning that placed her 24 nautical miles east-southeast of the burning tanker when the mayday came in. 24 miles at flank speed was 52 minutes. The watch officer had made that calculation before the captain arrived in the Combat Information Center. The captain arrived at 3:51, read the mayday position, read the ship's own position, read the chart, and made the decision that there was nothing to decide. All ahead flank, course to the EPIRB. Communications, inform 5th Fleet and Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, Muscat. Simultaneously, we are responding to the Mayday, ETA, 52 minutes, MH-60S, rescue configuration, launch preparation. Now, the destroyer's bow turned northwest, and her engines drove her toward the strait at 31 knots. The IRGCN picture was visible in the Combat Information Center before the ship had reached her new course heading. The RC-135V rivet joint orbiting over the Gulf of Oman had been tracking elevated fast boat activity in the western approaches to the strait since approximately 2:15. Boat movement consistent with coordinated positioning rather than routine patrol. The kind of pre-positioned activity that the intelligence pattern database associated with planned operations rather than opportunistic harassment. When the Mayday was received at 3:47, the timing was noted. The boat activity had been building for 90 minutes before the Mayday. The boats had not caused the Mayday. The tanker's fire was a real fire. A catastrophic mechanical failure of the kind that kills commercial sailors with statistical regularity and that has nothing to do with Iranian naval operations. But the boats were there, pre-positioned, and their presence in the Western Strait approaches was not a coincidence that anyone in the Combat Information Center was prepared to accept at face value. At 4:09, the fast boat contacts separated from their cluster and began moving east. 8 distinct contacts, speed 31 knots, bearing toward the position of the burning tanker, toward the life rafts now visible on the Seahawk's FLIR as it transited ahead of the destroyer. 8 IRGCN fast boats, 31 knots, converging on the position of 22 sailors in the water. The ESM suite confirmed coordinated shore-directed movement at 4:11. Command frequencies, burst transmissions, the pattern that the database recognized as an operation being managed from a shore command center at Bandar Abbas. These boats were not patrolling. They were executing a plan. The commanding officer looked at the geometry and understood it immediately. The fast boats would reach the tanker's position in approximately 18 minutes. The destroyer would arrive in 31 minutes. If the IRGCN boats reached the survivors first, the 22 sailors in the water became leverage, not hostages in a formal legal sense, but leverage in the only sense that mattered operationally. The physical presence of Iranian boats alongside or between the survivors would create a situation that the American destroyer would have to navigate around rather than directly through. He keyed the radio at 4:13. All stations, United States Navy warship conducting emergency search and rescue in the Strait of Hormuz. Responding to Mayday, commercial vessel on fire, persons in the water. We are the designated rescue coordinator under Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, Muscat. Any vessel approaching the rescue scene is requested to coordinate rescue efforts. This is a humanitarian emergency. All approaches to the rescue area should be made at safe speeds and with full navigation lighting. Channel 16 and the IRGCN guard frequency simultaneously. Public record established before the boats arrived, establishing the humanitarian character of the scene before any Iranian action could be characterized as anything other than interference with an active rescue. At 4:27, the MH-60S rescue swimmer reported visual contact with the first life raft. 4 survivors, visible, all conscious. The helicopter established its hover and began its first hoist cycle at 4:29. The rescue operation was underway before the IRGCN boats arrived and before the destroyer was on scene. At 4:31, the IRGCN boats reached the perimeter of the rescue area. 6 of the original 8. 2 had broken formation at 4:19 and returned west, cause unknown. 6 fast boats, their running lights on, their deck crews visible in the FLIR imagery. The helicopter was transmitting back to the CIC, took positions around the life raft cluster in a loose perimeter that was neither a rescue formation nor an overtly hostile one. They were simply there, present, encircling, occupying the geometry around the survivors. The surviving geometry tightens, not around a warship this time, but around a cluster of life rafts in the Strait of Hormuz, with 22 sailors waiting to be brought aboard. At 4:33, the shore batteries entered the CIC picture. The ESM suite reported fire control radar activations from the northern coast, bearing 017, a position on the Iranian shoreline that the intelligence database identified as a Noor anti-ship missile battery site that had been operationally active for 3 years. The emission profile was not search radar. It was fire control radar in its tracking mode, building a solution on the American destroyer inbound from the southeast at 31 knots. One battery. Then, at 4:36, a second activation on bearing 029. A second battery site, further west along the Iranian coastline, its fire control radar also transitioning to tracking mode. 2 Iranian shore batteries, both in tracking mode, both oriented toward the American destroyer, transiting the strait at flank speed toward a rescue scene, encircled by 6 IRGCN fast boats with 22 sailors in the water. The geometry of this morning had assembled itself with a precision that spoke to preparation. The IRGCN boats pre-positioned before the Mayday, the shore batteries activated within minutes of the destroyer's course, becoming predictable. The encirclement of the rescue scene established before the American ship arrived. None of it was accidental. At sea, distance is language, and the language being spoken on this Sunday morning in the Strait of Hormuz was complex, layered, and being spoken simultaneously in 3 different domains. The surface domain, where 6 fast boats held a perimeter, the shore domain, where 2 missile batteries were building targeting solutions, and the air domain, where a rescue helicopter was hoisting survivors one at a time from the black water below. The commanding officer's response was calibrated to all 3 domains at once. Electronic warfare officer, both battery fire control frequencies, jamming, passive degradation profile, same as the Gulf operation. I want their solutions degraded without giving them certainty that we are the source. The EW suite activated at 4:38. Communications. Flash traffic to 5th Fleet. 2 Noor batteries tracking mode. Shore batteries bearing 017 and 029. 6 IRGCN boats encircling rescue scene. We are jamming battery fire control frequencies. Rescue operation continuing. We are on scene in 17 minutes. Request F/A18 CAP soonest available. The transmission went at 4:39. And channel 16 and guard frequency now. IRGCN vessels at the position of the distressed commercial vessel in the northern Strait of Hormuz. This is a United States Navy warship, designated rescue coordinator for this operation. You are positioned in proximity to an active rescue involving civilian mariners in distress under the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, to which Iran is a signatory. All vessels are obligated to render assistance to persons in distress and prohibited from interfering with rescue operations in progress. You are requested to clear the immediate rescue area and maintain 500 meters separation. Any action that impedes the recovery of these survivors will be reported to the International Maritime Organization and the United Nations Secretary General as a violation of the SOLAS Convention. All your movements are being recorded. SOLAS, the oldest and most universal maritime legal framework in the world, predating the modern law of the sea, binding every seafaring nation, including Iran. The commanding officer had named the specific convention, the specific obligation, and the specific international bodies that would receive the documented report. Not a threat, a legal framework established in the record that placed every subsequent Iranian action in a context that their own diplomatic and legal apparatus would have to manage. The helicopter completed its fourth hoist cycle at 4:44. 8 survivors recovered, 14 in the water or in remaining life rafts. At 4:47, one of the IRGCN fast boats moved. It reduced speed from its holding position and altered course slightly, a slow, deliberate drift toward the nearest occupied life raft at approximately 350 meters distance. Not a charge, not a sprint. The kind of movement a vessel makes when it is closing on a position that it intends to occupy. The helicopter pilot reported the movement at 4:48. The commanding officer's response was immediate. IRGCN vessel bearing 035 from the rescue helicopter. This is the United States Navy Rescue Coordinator. You are approaching an occupied life raft containing civilian distress survivors currently under active rescue. Stand clear of the raft. Any physical contact with or boarding of life rafts containing survivors of a maritime disaster constitutes an act directly violating SOLAS Article 98. The survivors in that raft will be recovered by United States Navy personnel. You are directed to hold your current position. The fast boat slowed. It did not reach the raft. It held position 280 meters from the nearest survivors and stayed there. At 4:53, the response from 5th Fleet arrived. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets airborne from the Carrier Strike Group in the Gulf of Oman, inbound to the rescue scene at best speed, ETA 20 minutes. The commanding officer noted the ETA, 20 minutes. His own ship was 11 minutes from scene arrival. The helicopter had completed its 7th hoist cycle. 13 survivors recovered, 9 remaining. The operation was proceeding. The geometry was being held. At 4:57, the first shore battery's emissions changed. The eastern battery on bearing 017 showed a degradation in its fire control emission profile that the EW suite assessed as consistent with the jamming's effectiveness. The battery's track data was becoming less precise, its solution less confident. The battery's operators were working with a degraded picture. They knew it. They could not be certain whether the degradation was internal equipment noise or external jamming. At 5:02, the eastern battery transitioned from fire control mode back to search mode. The track had been held for 29 minutes. Without a confident solution, the engagement authorization that the operators would have needed to act was not available to them. First battery down. The western battery on bearing 029 held its fire control mode for 4 more minutes before also transitioning to search at 05:06. Both batteries were now watching rather than targeting. The commanding officer noted both mode changes without comment. The destroyer arrived on scene at 5:07. She took position between the nearest IRGCN fast boat and the remaining life rafts, her hull interposing in the geometry that no radio transmission was required to communicate. The fast boat that had drifted toward the raft at 4:47 was now on the far side of the destroyer. From the survivors, the American ship's 290 feet of Arleigh Burke hull between the Iranian vessel and the people in the water. The ship's own rescue boats were in the water at 5:09, the small boats working the remaining rafts, while the helicopter continued its hoist operations on the survivors still floating free. The destroyer's medical team was on the flight deck, receiving the hoisted survivors, beginning assessment, beginning treatment. 16th survivor recovered at 5:18, 17th at 5:21. The operation's rhythm was steady, professional, methodical. The crew working as they had trained, the machinery of a search and rescue operation functioning in the way it functions when the crew knows what they are doing and is doing it. At 5:28, the two FA-18 arrived on station at 15,000 feet above the rescue scene, their navigation lights visible in the pre-dawn darkness above the strait, their presence establishing a combat air patrol geometry that connected the air domain to the surface picture below in a way that every vessel in the area could observe and assess. The IRGCN boats began their withdrawal at 5:31. Not a dramatic departure, a gradual reduction of their encirclement. Two boats turning west first, then two more, the formation dissolving at a pace that maintained whatever operational dignity remained available. The fast boat that had drifted toward the raft did not linger. By 5:44, all 6 contacts were at 10 miles and opening. 21st survivor recovered at 5:39. The 22nd, the tanker's engineering officer, who had remained at his station attempting to contain the fire until the last possible moment and who had entered the water with burns on both arms, was hoisted from the water at 5:47. 22 sailors had gone into the water at 3:47. 22 were aboard American vessels at 5:47. The commanding officer transmitted the rescue completion to 5th Fleet and Maritime Rescue Coordination Center, Muscat, at 5:51. Mayday response complete. 22 survivors recovered, 0 fatalities. IRGCN encirclement withdrawn at 05:31. Shore batteries returned to search mode. Eastern battery at 05:02, Western at 05:06. F/A 18 CAP released from station. Full reconstruction package follows. He stood in the CIC for a moment, looking at the tactical display. The strait was clear of the fast boats now. The shore batteries were in their dormant search profiles. The tanker was settling lower in the water, her fire still burning above the waterline, her hull structure intact below it. The morning sky to the east was showing the first gray of dawn above the Omani coast. A full reconstruction, he said. Begin at the Mayday receipt, 0347. Document the IRGCN boat pre-positioning timeline. The elevated activity that the RC-135V tracked from 0215, 92 minutes before the Mayday. The boat departure toward the rescue scene at 0409, their arrival at 0431. The shore battery activation sequence. First battery at 0433, second at 0436. REW activation at 0438. Both batteries mode changed to search, timing. The fast boat movement toward the life raft at 0447 and our radio response. Survivor recovery timeline from first hoist at 0429 to final recovery at 0547. He looked at the intelligence officer of the pre-positioning. 92 minutes before the Mayday, IRGCN boats were moving into the strait in a pattern consistent with a planned operation. The tanker's fire was real. There is no question about that. But the boats were already there. The assessment question is whether the IRGCN was conducting a planned operation against commercial shipping that was preempted by the Mayday, or whether their intelligence picture gave them advance notice of a developing emergency aboard the tanker. Either assessment has significant implications. That analysis goes to every intelligence team covering IRGCN operations in the Gulf. He looked at the communications officer, an international maritime organization. Full documentation, the IRGCN perimeter positioning around occupied life rafts, the boat movement toward an occupied raft, the shore battery targeting mode activation during an active maritime rescue. Iran is a SOLAS signatory. The record of their actions on this morning goes into the formal IMO channel today, with full timestamps and the EW data showing when the batteries locked and when they stood down. He set down his coffee and looked at the medical officer's board. 22 survivors, 3 with injuries requiring hospital-level care, 19 stable and being processed for transfer. All alive, all going home. The 2 F-18S, he said. They arrived at 0528. The IRGCN boats began withdrawing at 0531. 3 minutes between cap establishment and the beginning of the encirclement's dissolution. Log that interval as an intelligence product. It tells us something about what the IRGCN commander on those boats was watching and what moved him. He left the Combat Information Center at 6:07. The Strait of Hormuz held its regular morning traffic below the still smoking column that marked the tanker's position. 22 sailors were alive because a destroyer had gone to 31 knots the moment the Mayday came in, because a helicopter crew had been hoisting survivors before the fast boats arrived, and because the commanding officer had understood with complete clarity that the humanitarian obligation was the mission, and that everything else, the fast boats, the shore batteries, the encirclement of a rescue scene, was geometry to be managed, while the mission continued. The geometry had been managed. The mission had been completed. 22 people were alive. The Strait of Hormuz belongs to every vessel that transits it lawfully. On this Sunday morning, the United States Navy had made that belonging real in the most direct possible way, by going to the rescue when it was called, by not stopping when Iran positioned itself to complicate the answer, and by bringing every single person in the water back aboard before the dawn came up over the Omani coast. The schedule does not change. The mission does not stop. And in the Strait of Hormuz, on the mornings when both of those things are tested at the same time against the most direct kind of pressure, 22 lives in the water and 6 fast boats and 2 shore batteries all watching. The answer is the same one it has always been. The mission continues.